Sun Tzu says strategy without tactics is the slowest road to victory. Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. Although there is surely wisdom in this, I think there has been way more strategies ruined by bad tactics than good tactics made obsolete by bad strategy. And the Gallipoli campaign of World War I was one of the most notable of these failures. The plan made complete strategic sense. The Ottoman Empire was the weakest member of the Central Powers, and its capital was vulnerable to an Entente incursion. Elimination of the Ottoman Empire would open the trade routes to Russia, consolidate the Balkans, and surround the Central Powers. However, the campaign was completely botched by terrible execution, to such a degree that nowadays the common opinion is that the Gallipoli campaign was never going to work and it was completely stupid. In this video, I will explain why the idea of the Gallipoli campaign was actually brilliant and why the execution completely ruined it. But before we get to the video, please subscribe and leave a like. Enjoy! It is January 1915. The Great War is in full swing. The Western Front is in a perpetual stalemate in the trenches, with seemingly no easy victory. Meanwhile in the east, Russian advances were crushed in Tannenberg, the Austrians in Galicia and Serbia, extending the gridlock to all fronts of the war. For both sides, there was only one quick way out: diplomatic maneuvering. And the Balkans played the key role in this. As for both the Entente and the Central Powers, the Balkans looked like a soft underbelly. A Bulgarian offensive into Serbia or a Romanian offensive against Austria were thought as potentially war-ending moves. The Germans scored the first win in this diplomatic front and successfully drove the Ottomans into the war on their side. Although the Ottomans failed miserably in the Caucasus against the Russians, they still proved to be a vital ally, as the closure of the straits locked Russia out of international trade and turned it into a time bomb. Ottoman entry threatened the vital Suez Canal and also strengthened the hand of the German Empire in the Balkans, making Bulgaria and Romania more likely to join the Central Powers. In this environment, a quick and decisive blow against the Ottoman Empire was suggested by Churchill. Churchill wanted to send a naval expedition through the straits and knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war, with a quick blow at its capital. To him, this made complete sense. To his credit, the Ottoman army had performed abysmally in the Balkan Wars, and in their most recent Caucasus offensive against Russia. It lacked equipment, training, logistical capabilities, and officers to perform to the level of the European great powers. Istanbul was also conveniently separated from the rest of the empire by the straits, so even if the occupation of its capital did not force the Ottomans into surrendering, the Turks could not hope to launch a counteroffensive to take the city back. It would also sever the German financial and industrial aid to the Turks, which kept the Ottoman army functional. The Entente could also expect a warm welcome in the city, as half of the population consisted of Christian and Jewish minorities that did not like the Turkish rule. All this made the operation plausible on paper, and if it was successful, it would bring a lot of benefits. Most importantly, the sea roads to Russia would be reopened. Russian grain would be free to go to France and Britain. Meanwhile, French and British financial and industrial aid could reach Russia. Just as importantly, it would be the end of German diplomatic maneuvering in the Balkans. With the Entente armies stationed right in Constantinople and the Black Sea firmly secured, neither Bulgaria or Romania would consider joining the Central Powers. On the contrary, Bulgaria could now be bribed with Adrianople and Greece with Smyrna. The knockout of the Ottoman Empire could swiftly cause a domino effect and rally the entire Balkans around the Entente. Though, just like in real life, I thought that the Entente would be able to control Anatolia and the remaining Turkish forces would continue to tie up Russian and British troops in the Caucasus and the Middle East. But even then, in this scenario, the war would be over by 1916. But when the campaign started in March 1915, first the naval incursions were stopped abruptly, with the Entente fleet losing several ships to minefields and coastal batteries. Then the follow-up landings were stopped by the Turkish defenses. So, what went wrong? I would say the main problem with the Gallipoli campaign was a mix of underestimating the enemy and biases with the Entente military planning process. The main plan proposed by Churchill did not involve boots on the ground at all. According to Churchill's plan, a fleet composed of outdated ships would go through the straits and point their guns at the Ottoman capital. This would theoretically force the Ottoman Empire to surrender. It was practically 19th century gunboat diplomacy. This was the main flaw of the initial plan. The British High Command wanted to impose 19th century methods to a modern war. And even in 19th century, gunboat diplomacy was mainly used to acquire concessions, not to demand complete capitulation. Even if the Dardanelles mission succeeded, the British fleet would find an Istanbul ready to fight and would still need boots on the ground. In fact, the British Empire had tried the gunboat diplomacy with the Ottomans back in 1807. The 1807 Dardanelles expedition was in fact more successful. The British fleet managed to push through the Dardanelles and reached Constantinople. Except once in Constantinople, they found themselves facing coastal batteries and were forced to retreat with heavy losses. It is likely that even if the Entente succeeded in 1915 with their Dardanelles naval operation, the result would have been the same. Churchill's plan depended on the Ottomans being completely incapable of putting up any resistance. Not effective. Any resistance. The Ottomans had to immediately surrender after seeing the Entente fleet in Istanbul. Otherwise, the only thing the Entente could do was bombing the city to the ground with no strategic benefit. It is hard to say why the British command went with this assumption. It's likely that there was some 19th century imperialist racism at play, but in militaries, there are also natural biases towards plans that underestimate the enemy. This was the case historically, and it is the case today. Remember, in 1915, every plan was fighting for the same financial and military resources. London and Paris wanted to divert only so many resources away from the Western Front, and the High Command was interested in gaining maximum value from minimal commitment. It's likely that had the Gallipoli plan initially involved hundreds of thousands of troops, the campaign would never have been given the green light. Meanwhile, knocking the Ottoman Empire with using only obsolete ships and no troops at all sounded like great value. However unlikely it may have been. So that's what was attempted, and when the naval push failed, the follow-up landings were hastily executed, underplanned, and were planned around clearing the defenses in Gallipoli, which would then make the naval push successful, rather than trying to find the best way to occupy Istanbul. So how could the plan be improved? First of all, the gunboat strategy needed to be completely abandoned. The Gallipoli campaign should have been treated as a land offensive, supported by the navy. rather than the other way around. The second problem was Gallipoli itself. The peninsula is a choke point and a hell to operate in. It has no ports, no suitable beaches, no infrastructure, and not even fresh water. On top of that, the coastline is dominated by hills in the center of the peninsula. The Entente forces landed in Gallipoli because they treated it as a naval operation, and their objective was to clear the straits so the fleet could reach Istanbul. Otherwise, landing in Gallipoli made absolutely no sense. And with the gunboat plan discarded, the natural decision would have been landing somewhere else. That being said, it is still tricky to find a good launch point for an offensive on Istanbul. The European territories Ottomans had in 1915 lacked proper ports. However, there are many spots that are much more suitable for landings than Gallipoli. The terrain near the small coastal town of Enes is much more suitable, for example, with its wide open beaches. The town also had some infrastructure, including a railway line and a small port, which could be repurposed to support Entente operations logistically. But more importantly, should the initial landings go as planned, the Entente armies would have immediate access to the plains of eastern Thrace, where the terrain was much more suitable for offensive operations than the mountains of Gallipoli. Executed well, in my opinion, a land campaign launched from Enes could have succeeded in reaching Istanbul. The most problematic part of an Enes campaign would have been the exposed flank to the Bulgarians. But the Bulgarians waited for the Gallipoli campaign to be practically over before feeling secure enough to join the Central Powers. It is impossible to know as we are speculating, but with a large Entente army at its gates, Bulgaria would probably stay out of the war and may even consider joining the Entente if bribed with the territory in eastern Thrace, especially Adrianople. Hindsight is everything, but at the end, the Entente command refused to commit what was needed when needed for this theoretically brilliant campaign, and the entire Gallipoli front went down the history records as mission impossible. But with just a bit of foresight and level thinking, it could have delivered the knockout blow Churchill was hoping for. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, please subscribe and leave a like, and I will see you in the next one.